Morning. Nice to see everybody. I'm super excited today. I'll tell you in a second why. This angel suddenly appeared at a preacher's meeting, and it appeared to one person, and the angel said, because you're so unselfish and your behaviour is outstanding, I'm going to give you a choice between infinite wealth, wisdom, or beauty. And without any hesitation, the preacher turned around and says, I want infinite wisdom. And instantly it happened. So as the other preachers were all gathered together, they noticed that this one preacher that the angel appeared to had a little halo around his head. And somebody said to him, say something wise. So he thought for a moment and he said, I should have taken the money. I'm excited because we're beginning a new sermon series today. I always get excited when I'm starting something new. And it's going to be about choices. And over the next few weeks we're going to look at Joshua's choice to choose and serve God. We're going to look at the prophets of Baal and their decision to follow Baal. We'll look at Judah's decision to betray Jesus. And we're going to look at Jesus' decision to do the will of the Father. Today we're going to look at Lot. And we're going to look at his decision, and we're going to see that actually his decision cost him everything. It cost him everything. Even his sons-in-laws, their wives, and his own wife's life. So that's what we're going to look at today. And we begin way back in Genesis chapter 13, verse 11. And notice here that Lot chose to live among the wicked in Sodom. Now, why did he choose to live among them? Well, possibly because he loved money. Possibly because he loved prominence. That a place of being important type thing. So he wanted to serve God, but he also wanted to enjoy the pleasures of this world. And we're going to see that as we go along. And you might be thinking, well, how do you know this, Mike? How do you know that he wanted to enjoy the pleasures of this world? Well, remember, when we jumped to Genesis 19, he chose to live in the plain bordering with the wicked cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, and noticed that he moved into the city. And it became a part of that city's culture. So yes, he still believed in God, and yes, he didn't approve of all the wickedness that was going on in Sodom and Gomorrah, but just because he was an official sitting at the city gate didn't mean that he had any impact at all on those cities. In other words, he may be a believer in God, but now at this point he's more or less spiritually powerless. He's powerless. He's so spiritually powerless, according to verse 14, he couldn't even convince his sons-in-law and their wives to leave Sodom before God's judgment was coming. As far as they were concerned, Lot, this guy, he's not a man of God. He's a joker. That's what they thought about him. And you'll notice here that he hesitated. So why did he hesitate? Think about this. God is about to destroy Sodom. He's got to wipe it off the face of the planet, yeah? And yet, he's hesitating. Why is he hesitating? I suspect because everything he attained is about to be destroyed. His wealth, his business contacts, his home, his job, everything was going to be destroyed, but his very life. And Lot's wife and his two daughters, more or less, if you see the text, have to get dragged out of the city for them to be saved. Does that not tell us something about the appeal of where they were living? Where the two angels more or less drag them out to bring them to safety? And as we know, Lot's wife died instantly because she looked back when God specifically said, do not look back. And it cost her her life. Think about this for a second. Everything Lot wanted in life was gone in a moment. It was gone in a moment. Everything. He wanted possessions. He wanted a place of position. But in the end, he lost it all, including his wife. When we go back to chapter 13, verse 11, when Lot separated from his family, from his uncle Abraham, we read again that Lot chose for himself the Jordan Valley. That was his choice. He wanted to go there. And if that tells us anything about Lot, it tells us just how selfish the guy was. I mean, his decision to live in that area, he didn't even stop once to think about the impact that's going to have on his family and what's best for them. He never once thought that this impact of moving there would have any impact on his family's relationship with God. He didn't stop to think about any of this stuff. And if Lot had been a good husband, if Lot had been a good father, then he would never have chose to pitch his tent towards Sodom. He would never have done that. So I want to share with you three practical ideas we can get from Lot's decision. And the first one is his desires. Now remember that Abraham, his uncle, all he wanted to do was please God. That's all he wanted to do. But Lot appears to want to please himself. And when we think about Abraham, notice, he was wealthy in livestock, gold and silver. Yeah? So he's a wealthy man. Absolute wealthy. And as long as Lot stayed with Abraham, he had everything he would ever need. Because being a part of Abraham's family meant that he himself was wealthy. He himself had a part of all of this. But despite having all that wealth, it doesn't seem to be enough for him. He didn't want to live in Canaan with Abraham, this open land. He didn't want that. He wanted more than wealth. He wanted to be popular. He wanted to be an important person, hence at the city gates. And he knew that the only way to get all this stuff that he wanted was to go to a city. Because a city is full of people. And there you can be really popular. And that's a lesson for us today, isn't it? We need to think twice about what our motives are. Is our motives to please God, or are we just trying to please people and get popularity with people? The second thing we notice is his decision. Lot's decision came about because there were some issues between Lot's people and Abraham's people. And basically, some of Lot's herds were running into Abraham's herds, and their servants were starting to fight and argue and get upset with each other over it. And so what did Lot decide the best decision was to do? Notice, the two men parted company. In his mind, he thought the best solution to this issue is to separate from Abraham. And if you notice the text before, it actually says that Abraham suggested this. I want to say that's a bad decision on both of their parts. And I think it's a big mistake for Lot. A bad decision on Lot's part. And again, you might be thinking, well, why is this a bad decision, Mike? Why is it bad to separate? It's a bad decision because Abraham was the biggest spiritual influence in Lot's life. The biggest influence. You know, when we read our Bibles, you read about Abraham praying to God over and over and over again. Do you ever read about Lot praying? When we read our Bibles, we see that Abraham built altars to the Lord. Do you ever read about Lot building altars to the Lord? You see, he needed Abraham in his life because Abraham was the biggest spiritual influence in his life. But he decided, I don't need that influence. He decided, I'm going to go and live without it. I could do without it. Eleanor Roosevelt once said, one's philosophy is not best experienced in words. It's expressed in the choices one makes. In the long run, we shape our lives and we shape ourselves. The process never ends until we die. And the choices we make are ultimately whose responsibility? Our responsibility. See, Lot can't blame Abraham for this. This is his own mess. This is his own decision. So, Lot walking by faith, Lot walking by sight, he chose on the basis of what he appealed to him. Over here there is nothing, just land. Over here there's a city, there's people, there's population, and that's what he saw. And he chose through sight. Abraham, on the other side, he was walking by faith. And if you read the text, you'll see that Abraham actually gave Lot the choice. You choose what direction you want to go. And so Lot's choice was self-seeking, it was self-gratifying. But Abraham, he learned that it wasn't his plan to go and live in Canaan. That was God's plan for him to go and live in Canaan. He understood that. And do you ever think, surely he must have spoke to Lot about this. Surely he must have spoke to him about it. Lot would have learned from Abraham about God and the great promises that God made to Abraham, that you're going to be a great nation and you're going to possess this land. Surely Lot would have heard about that. Abraham would have taught him it. And surely he would have learned what real faith is all about. When Abraham spoke to him about how you obey God to sacrifice Isaac, surely he would have spoke to him about that. But it appears that Lot didn't learn anything because his choice cost him everything. Number 3, our decisions are going to affect others. We all know if you take a stone and you throw it in a pond, then the ripples start, don't they? And those ripples will keep going till they get to the water's edge. It's going to have an impact all around. And as I mentioned earlier, if Lot had really was concerned about the spiritual welfare of his family, he would have kept his family miles away from Sodom. He would have done that. But his decision caused a ripple effect. Not only on him, but on his family. And it would have done so much effect way beyond that he ever imagined. Like I said, he lost his sons-in-law who were pledged to marry his daughters, and he lost his wife. And we know what happens next, don't we? After the destruction. So both of Lot's daughters became pregnant by their father. The older daughter had a son, and she named him Moab. He is the father of the Moabites of today. The younger daughter also had a son, and she named him Ben-Ami, and he is the father of the Amorites of today. Now, when you're talking about the Moabites and you're talking about the Ammonites, you all have to open your Bibles to see how much enemies they became of God's people. Now, basically what's happening is they're desperate. I can understand they're desperate. There's nobody around. As far as they were concerned, Lot's daughters, this was the end of their world. It was the end of the world. And so they're thinking, how are we going to keep the family line alive? So they decide to get their father drunk and they have sexual relations with him. The whole thing's a mess, isn't it? It's a mess. And so, it was from this family that their lives are going to be marked with worldly desires. You only have to look at the Moabites in the Bible, you only have to look at the Amorites in the Bible to see how worldly all this has become. And as parents, we will have to make decisions in our lives. We know that. We have to make big decisions. And when you're thinking about those decisions, do you ever pause? Do you ever stop and pray about it? And think about the impact it's going to have on you? And the impact it's going to have on your family? You know, I know when Phil and I left Birmingham to come up to Liverpool, we knew it was going to have an impact on us. And we knew it was going to have an impact on the kids we were leaving behind. We knew that. But we prayed about it. And we thought it was the best thing for us to do. And things worked out all right. We thank God for that. So what I'm saying is, I know it's not easy to move home. And I know it's not easy to move country. It's not easy to do that. But that's why we have to make sure that when you move, that you find a body of believers that are close to you. You need to find a church near to you so that you can be encouraged and so that you can encourage them. It's so important to keep those spiritual ties with other Christians. Otherwise, your kids may end up losing the main spiritual influence in their life, like Lot did. And if you're a Christian who's married to someone who isn't a Christian, then ask yourself this question. Do you really believe that not coming to worship, not coming to studies and fellowship meals and things, do you really believe that's going to influence your husband or your wife? I mean, if I've learned anything over the years, it's simply this. If people around us, especially our families, if they don't think that worship is important to us, then guess what? They're not going to think it's important to them. If they don't think that Bible study is important to us, then they're not going to think it's important to them. If they don't think that getting together for fellowship meals and visiting and all that thing is important to us, you're never going to influence them. Never. You see, Lot paid a high price for the mistakes he made, but as Romans 15:4 tells us, we need to learn the lessons from the past. We need to learn these lessons. We need to learn the lessons that he made, the bad decisions, so that we won't make the same mistakes as he did. And here's one of the things that I think is a big mistake for a lot of parents with children. This verse. Start children off on the way they should go. And even if they are old, they will not turn from it. Notice, start children off as the way they should go. You see, parents play an important role in the spiritual development of a child's life. But you need to understand that you're not responsible for your child becoming a Christian. You're not responsible if your child makes stupid decisions when they get older. You're not responsible for that. Because there are times when even parents don't have enough influence on their child's life. That's why God has blessed us with a church family. That's why he's blessed us with a family like that. You know, the church family should be the place where we all come together to be spiritually influenced by each other. And that's so important in the child of a life. That's why the kids' classes are so important, to instill that in their children and the children's lives. And if you don't keep up that, Well, maybe you're going to make the same mistake that Lot did by leaving Abraham. By leaving the most spiritually influential part of his life, it cost Lot everything. And what I'm saying is this: if you leave your spiritual family, it may end up costing you more than you'll ever imagine. It may end up costing you and your family their soul. So, a scripture reading was Peter, 2 Peter. And Peter speaks a lot in his second letter about Lot. And in our reading, we couldn't help but notice the word righteous comes up for Lot. And you're thinking, how on earth can this guy be righteous after everything I've said about him? How is that possible? Well, Lot was righteous in the same way that you and I are righteous, by trusting in the God of Abraham. Remember, God remembered Abraham, whose faith was counted to him as righteous. And so the only answer to the question of why Lot is called righteous is simply because he, like Abraham, believed God. That's the only answer. Lot was righteous, not because he acted perfectly in Genesis 19 with angels and things, not because of that, but look what he says. Lot, a righteous man, was distressed by the depraved conduct of the lawless, for that righteous man living among them day after day was tormented in his righteous soul by the lawless deeds he saw and heard. Remember, he's a city official. He's at where? At the gate. The gate back in the day is kind of like going to the post office years ago. You know, if you want to gossip about anybody, go to the post office. Everybody's talking about everybody in the post office. Yeah? Well, he's at the city gate. And guess what? He's seeing people coming in. He's seeing people coming out. And people would stop and see, Lot, you'll never guess what just happened in there. He's heard all the blasphemy. He's heard all the cursing. He's seen all the ungodly behaviour, all the homosexuality. He's seen it all. He's heard it all. But notice, in his soul, he's tormented. He's tormented. And so, despite his bad decisions, despite his selfish decisions, he was righteous because Peter tells us he was tormented in his soul by the lawless deeds that he saw and heard. You see, Lot had to deal with the consequences of his decision. And he probably had to pay that price for the rest of his life, thinking back about his wife, his sons-in-laws, his daughters. He would have to carry that all the days of his life. And if we're honest with ourselves, we too make many bad decisions, don't we? I've certainly made a lot of bad decisions in my life. And we too are still facing the consequences of those decisions. You see, when we look at Lot, we see an example of someone who was almost lost, and yet he was saved. When we look at Lot's wife, we see an example of somebody who was almost saved, and yet was lost. The good news is that God is willing to continue to work in and through us despite those bad decisions we make. Isn't that incredible? He's still working with us. And so the question is, are you willing, or are you allowing those bad decisions of old to affect your relationship with God today? Are you willing to continue working in God's kingdom until the day you die to receive salvation? Or are you going to be like Lot's wife, constantly looking back, wondering what could have been, wondering what I could have had, wondering what I could have become? And in the process, you lose your soul. So let me leave you with the question that Jesus asks us all, not just today, but every day of our lives. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet forfeit their soul. God bless.